Before I dive into this insane story about how my nosy WA neighbor Karen thought she could steal my solar power to fuel her Tesla, only to learn the hard way that I don't play when it comes to freeloaders, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this are too wild to miss and you're going to want to be here when the next one drops. It all started on one of those blazing hot afternoons when the sun seemed to hang just above my house like it had nowhere else to be, pouring enough light onto my newly installed solar grid that the batteries in my garage hummed like a giant beehive stuffed with electricity. And that's when I noticed Karen, my HOA's self-proclaimed energy conservation advocate, who actually spent more time tattling on people about their lawn height than doing anything remotely helpful, slowly rolling her pearl-white Tesla into my driveway without so much as a knock on the door, smirking as she grabbed my extension cord like it belonged to her and plugged it right into her charging port. At first, I thought maybe she was confused or maybe her own charger was down, but then I remembered the WA email chain where she bragged about how she didn't believe in paying unfair rates for green energy, and how neighbors should help neighbors, which was just code for her getting free stuff while bullying everyone else. So I decided to wait and see how far she would push her luck, because I had invested nearly 40 grand into this solar system and the last thing I was about to do was let Karen suck me dry of kilowatts for free, especially when I had already caught her snooping around my yard 3 times last month pretending to inspect the wall landscaping requirements. Sure enough, over the next week she made a routine of it, pulling in right after work, plugging in without asking, sometimes even waving through my front window like she was doing me a favor, and it boiled my blood to watch her act like I was her personal charging station while my bills and equipment took the wear. But instead of storming out immediately, I decided to play the long game, because if Karen was going to be bold enough to steal my power, I was going to teach her a lesson in the same language she understood: embarrassment and exposure. So I dug into the smart grid settings of my inverter system and realized I had full control over the current output, which meant I could literally choose how much voltage went into anything connected, and that gave me an idea that made me grin like a mad scientist in a comic book. I set up cameras, discreetly angled from my upstairs window, and waited until she returned the next day, and like clockwork, Karen rolled up, sunglasses on, blasting pop music, casually plugged into my system, and strutted into her house across the street like she owned the entire neighborhood, completely unaware that her greed was about to backfire spectacularly, because while her car began sipping away at my solar stored power, I slowly raised the voltage to maximum safe output, not enough to fry anything permanently that would have made me liable, but just enough to cause a surge that would confuse the Tesla's onboard system, and within minutes her car's alarm blared like a dying whale, lights flashing, the charging port airing out in bright red letters, and the best part was Karen running out of her house in panic, clutching her phone, barefoot on the hot asphalt, shrieking like someone had stolen her baby, trying to figure out what was wrong while my cameras captured every second. She yanked the plug, cursed at my extension cord, even kicked her own bumper in frustration, and then had the audacity to bang on my door screaming, "What did you do to my car?" As though I had forced her to trespass on my property, but I calmly opened the door, keeping my face neutral, and said, "Karen, you've been illegally siphoning power from my solar grid without permission, and I have everything on camera," which instantly drained the color from her face like someone had pulled a plug on her confidence, though she quickly tried to recover, snapping back that the WA rules said shared community resources had to be available if a neighbor needed them, and I almost laughed in her face because I knew the bylaws front to back and there was no such rule, just her twisted interpretation of anything that benefited her. So I told her flatly that she had exactly 2 choices. Either I report her theft to both the police and the WA board with the video evidence, which would surely lead to fines and a possible criminal charge, or she apologizes, pays for every kilowatt she stole, and never touches my property again. And you'd think that would knock some humility into her, but Karen being Karen, she crossed her arms, squinted like a spoiled child, and said, "You wouldn't dare." So that's when I pulled out my phone, hit play on the footage of her plugging in across 4 different days, and watched her jaw tighten as the sound of her own bragging carried through the speakers, and before she could even respond, my next-door neighbor, who had been on the receiving end of her WA harassment for years, walked over because he had heard the commotion and immediately started laughing when he saw the video, which only made Karen's temper boil hotter, but instead of backing down, I decided to twist the knife by saying loud enough for the neighbors who had gathered around to hear. "You know, Karen, it's funny how you love sending out those weekly HOA violation notices, but here you are caught on tape stealing power like a criminal," and the look on her face at that moment was priceless. Pure humiliation mixed with rage. So she did what she always does when cornered. She threatened to sue, waving her phone like she was recording some great injustice. But everyone present knew she had no case because trespassing and theft don't magically become legal just because you drive an expensive car. And my neighbor even shouted, "Hey Karen, maybe next time you should buy your own charger instead of mooching off everyone else," which set the entire group laughing, and I swear steam practically shot out of her ears as she stomped back to her Tesla, muttering curses, and peeled away so fast she nearly clipped the curb. Of course, that wasn't the end, because Karen doesn't know how to lose gracefully. And the very next HOA meeting she tried to file a formal complaint against me for endangering her property with unsafe electrical practices, but I walked in with a USB drive loaded with every clip, a full printout of my solar warranty, and even a statement from the installer confirming everything was safe and up to code. And when I played the video on the big screen projector in front of the entire HOA, complete with her plugging in and smirking like she was queen of the block, the room erupted in laughter while the board president, who was tired of her antics too, told her flatly that not only was her complaint dismissed, but she was being fined for repeated violations of trespassing and unauthorized property use, and if she pulled another stunt like that, they'd move to strip her of voting privileges altogether, which was basically the HOA version of exile, and Karen sat there seething, unable to argue because every single person had just watched her dig her own grave. After that, things got surprisingly quiet, because Karen stopped sending violation notices, stopped showing up uninvited, and most importantly, stopped touching my solar grid, though every time I see her drive by, I catch her glaring at me like she's still plotting revenge. But the truth is she's powerless now, and my neighbors actually started thanking me for standing up to her, saying it felt like the whole neighborhood could finally breathe without her constant meddling. And while I'll never forget the sight of her Tesla freaking out under that surge, I'll admit the best part wasn't the prank itself. It was finally showing Karen that she wasn't untouchable, that her bullying had consequences, and that sometimes the best way to deal with a parasite is to let them expose themselves while you sit back, adjust the voltage, and watch the fireworks unfold.